Greetings to my fellow peers. This is Troy with my first ever podcast. Today we'll be talking about pretty much the whole controversy surrounding race and kind of my viewpoints on that. So let's just get started right into it. So pretty much I view race as particularly a different subject of the matter in a sense of your own traits. So no duh, I'm going to see you as a colored person or a white person, but I don't care for that. I'm not going to call you an African American when you've never been to Africa. I just think that's kind of stupid. So I'll call you by your name as I address most people. So the United States sees race as a political agenda, the way I see it. And as one group feels more oppressed than the other, creating terms such as white privileged and Black Lives Matter. So the topic I'll be discussing today is whiteness, and let's just dive right into it. So personally, I've never had any problems with my skin color in my 17 years living on Earth. If I ever did something bad, I was called out on it. Anything good, I was congratulated, but never had this anything to do with the color of my skin. I'm blessed to live in an environment where you can be accepted for who you are and the action you provide to this community. However, I do believe it is different elsewhere, but in my experiences with the term whiteness, it is all arbitrary for people to label you for making a living of yourself, succeeding in ways only to discredit that based on the color of your skin. So the way I assess race or ethnicity consists of three major categories, and that includes location, language, and culture. I believe the location in which they are originated from should be the underlying factor as a race. If a Black person is born in America, they should be labeled as an American, not an African. This is where language comes into play, since a Black person is born in America, most likely they will speak English and as a result should be called a true American. And with culture, based on their living style, should be totally up to them and not what people think. Text today I'll be providing is through the song, and in particular Blackbird of the Beatles, which was published in 1968. So the reason why I chose this text is I believe that something as small as a song can paint a bigger picture in the eyes of millions. And kind of why I chose this song was the symbolic nature of the song illustrates the movement of the racial discrimination of its peak back in the 60s. So Paul McCartney wrote this about the civil rights struggle for African Americans after reading about the race riots in U.S. concerning the Little Rock 9 incident. The symbolic messages you'll see throughout the song includes the title, which is Blackbird, and pretty much the slang for bird in the British community is girl, so if you apply those together you get black girl. And another little symbolic message is the lyrics of take these broken wings and learn to fly, meaning like you'll get through this, you'll survive. If you guys aren't familiar with the song Blackbird, I'll give you guys a quick little rundown on how it sounds, but I will not be singing, however, because I don't want to make the neighbors cry or wake them, so here it goes. Welcome back to my podcast, my fellow peers. I'm here with my colleague Michael, who also goes to SRV, and today we'll be talking about pretty much what's going on today with whiteness and just race as in general. And my first question brings to the table is, how has whiteness affected your life?
I'd say there's many direct and indirect effects of whiteness and the privileges associated with that. And most of the direct ones would probably just include the community that I'm in and the advantages of living in a more affluent neighborhood, which obviously includes better education and better opportunities when it comes to, higher paying jobs in the future and, better educations down the line regarding like secondary education in colleges and universities.
Okay, well, I totally agree with your point, which brings to my next question of the table, and that is, do you believe in white privilege? And if so, do you think you, like as a white person, do you think you have white privilege, do you think?
I'd say generally overall, within America, there is a overarching white privilege that many people experience, and although everyone's individual advantages may vary, race obviously does play an important factor in a person's life.
Okay, so Michael, there are many forms of definition with race. What is your personal definition, and how do you see race?
Obviously, race has changed kind of over the years. When Europeans would be migrating into America, such as Germans and other Eastern Europeans, they wouldn't be seen as white back then.
Exactly.
But over time, race has kind of evolved into, strictly color, where it doesn't really matter about like your nationalities, whether you're from Africa versus, other colored nations versus, European nations, stuff like that. It's more strictly based on, white, black, colored versus white. So I'd say that's kind of the evolved definition of race these days.
So when a person is of color, like say they're black, would you call them a black person or an African American person? Because there's a misconception that when someone says, oh, you're African American, even though they've never been to Africa. So that kind of just paints a bigger picture. Like, what are your views on that?
I would say that is kind of the general consensus now, that African American isn't really the best term for people of color, just because a lot of people come from other backgrounds that aren't even from that continent. So it's as the term was created when blacks may have came over as part of the slave trade, but now when people have all these different varying backgrounds, African American isn't really a sufficient term to generalize one group of people.
So I like how your viewpoints on race is very different from like the average person at our school. And the next question is, how would you relate that to ethnicity? And like, what are the similarities or just differences, or what deceptions you see?
A lot of the misconceptions is kind of the belief that ethnicity and race are one and the same, whereas nationality kind of is in many parts very different from race, in that you may call someone an African and may immediately think of a certain skin color, but if they're from South Africa, a lot of people from there may be considered white in terms today. So I think the big difference is just that nationality and ethnicity doesn't really determine a person's race and how they're seen in society, I'd say.
All right, well, Michael Walker, I'd like to thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Welcome, everyone. I'm here with Cameron Turner, and he identifies as a white male. And that brings to my question is, do you believe in white privilege?
No, I do not believe in white privilege.
And why is that?
Well, there's a lot of controversy going on about systematic racism, and that's not a thing. It's all about culture, who works harder to get where they want to be, and how you're raised as a child.
Cameron, what are your exact viewpoints on race and ethnicity, and how would you relate them in between, or just how are they different in a way?
Well, like I said earlier, it has a huge deal to do with culture. Culture is basically what kind of makes you the person you are, and makes you decide the things that you're going to do in life, and how your parents kind of treat you when you grow up. Saying a lot of people like say, oh, Asian people, they're smart and everything, and it's like, it's true. It's because they're raised to do good in school, to be successful, to do all this stuff, and it brings the argument whether different cultures are getting accepted into colleges based off systematic racism, and that's not true at all. There's a higher percentage of Asian people in colleges due to the fact that they're raised differently, and they get more education, and they try harder in school.
So going back to the white privilege topic, do you think you have benefited from this? If not, or what are your views on it? Like I said,
no one has benefited from white privilege in a very long time. racism is over. It's ended. Nobody cares anymore. It's kind of, no one knows the real definition of racism. Racism is whether you believe that your race is a higher power or a higher being than the other race. The new definition of racism nowadays is whether you get offended by it or not.
Yeah.
So throughout all the media sources, which includes the news channel outlets, there is being targeted with a certain demographic that white people are considered racist. What are your guys' viewpoints on this topic of interest?
Well, white people may be considered racist because of an individual incident that may have happened. So a lot of people like to label or put into groups. That's like saying all black people steal stuff. That's just labeling and putting into groups. It's kind of all about, it's not the statistics, or it doesn't run down the statistics or anything like that. Oh, well, this percentage of white people are racist, or this percentage of black people steal. It's all about who they are as a person. So we shouldn't label it as an individual.
So Cameron, what are your solutions with the term racist, and how would you fix that in a world where everyone is just very sensitive on that topic? Like, what are your solutions?
I think we should start to see a change, or we should try to create a change on the way we interpret other people and how we shouldn't label them as an individual or a statistic. Or we should not label them as a statistic, just more as an individual, and just stop complaining about stuff that doesn't matter.
And do you believe in the notation that the only way to fix racism is to stop talking about it?
Yes.
There we go. Cameron Turner, I'd like to thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.